The mourners have come from all over for this historic funeral. The televised broadcast reached 32.1 million people in the UK.
The world watched as Princess Diana captivated millions with her grace, compassion, and dedication to helping others. Her untimely death in 1997 left a profound impact, sparking an outpouring of grief like no other. But amid the sorrow and tributes, one detail has lingered in mystery for decades: why her casket remained closed at her funeral. Now at 75, King Charles just leaked why Princess Diana's casket wasn't open. Diana and Charles. Before we delve into the long, unanswered question of her casket, let's see how Diana became so beloved among the people. The story of Princess Diana and Prince Charles is one of both royal grandeur and personal depth, a tale that captures the world's fascination with the British monarchy. It began with two individuals from different walks of life, whose paths crossed and led to a marriage that would forever change the landscape of the royal family. Their relationship, though complex and tested, was marked by moments of happiness and shared joy, especially in the early years. Diana Frances Spencer was born on July 1, 1961, into a family with deep aristocratic roots. Her father, Edward John Spencer, was the 8th Earl Spencer, and her mother, Frances Ruth Burke Roche, was the daughter of the 4th Baron Fermoy. Diana's childhood was marked by a blend of privilege and pain. The Spencers, while highly respected within the British aristocracy, faced their share of challenges. Diana's parents' marriage, strained for several years, ended in divorce when Diana was just 7 years old. This had a profound impact on Diana as she was very close to both of her parents. The divorce, which occurred in 1969, led to her being raised primarily by her father, with her mother taking a distant role in her life. Despite the emotional upheaval, Diana's early years were filled with opportunities. Her family had close ties to the royal family, particularly through her mother's connection. Diana spent her formative years in the Spencer family home, Althorpe House, in Northamptonshire. It was here that she developed a passion for charity work, as well as an interest in the arts. She attended several schools, including the prestigious Westheath Girls' School, where she made a mark as a talented swimmer and dancer. However, it wasn't just her beauty that would later captivate the world. Diana had a warmth and genuineness about her that set her apart from other young women in her position. She was known for her caring nature and for her empathy toward those less fortunate, qualities that would later define her time as a princess. Prince Charles, born November 14, 1948, was the eldest son of Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. From the moment of his birth, Charles was thrust into the limelight as the heir apparent to the British throne. His early life was a world apart from Diana's, marked by the weight of responsibility and expectation. Charles spent much of his childhood away from his family, attending boarding schools where he was groomed for his future role. His education was one of the most thorough any royal had received up to that point, involving years of private tutors in schools like Cheam Preparatory School and Gordonstown in Scotland, which his father had also attended. Gordonstown was often a difficult experience for Charles. Its strict discipline and remote location were far removed from the comforts of royal life. Despite these challenges, Charles showed a keen interest in various subjects, from history to agriculture, and he developed a particular passion for the environment. However, the loneliness he often experienced during his youth left a mark on him. His relationships with his family were formal, and his mother was often absent due to her royal duties. As a result, Charles grew up with a deep sense of duty, but also a desire for more personal connection, something that would shape his later relationships. As a young man, Charles attended the University of Cambridge, where he studied archaeology and anthropology. This was an important milestone in his life, as it allowed him to step away from the suffocating pressures of royal life and gain a broader perspective on the world. It was during these years that he began to develop a greater appreciation for cultural and social causes, some of which he would later champion as prince.
You've got to remember that when you marry, in my position, you're going to marry somebody who perhaps one day is going to become queen.
The story of Diana and Charles truly began to unfold in 1977 when they first met. It was, by all accounts, a rather unremarkable occasion. Diana, who was working as a nursery teacher at the time, had no idea that the man she was meeting was the future King of England. For Charles, it was a chance encounter with a young woman who was both intriguing and different from the women he had encountered in the past. Their connection deepened over time, and despite the 13-year age gap, they found common ground. Diana was, by all accounts, easy to talk to and possessed a natural charm that drew people to her. Charles was taken with her, and she, in turn, found herself captivated by his sense of responsibility and his intellect. It wasn't long before the two began seeing each other more frequently, and their relationship slowly blossomed. By 1981, Charles and Diana's relationship had become serious. The couple was frequently seen together in public, and their relationship attracted much media attention. After a few years of dating, Prince Charles proposed to Diana on February 6, 1981, during a trip to the Caribbean. The proposal was widely celebrated as the couple seemed like the perfect match, a prince and a beautiful young woman from an aristocratic background. In the years following their marriage, Diana and Charles were blessed with 2 children. Their first son, Prince William, was born on June 21, 1982, at St. Mary's Hospital in London. The birth of William was a momentous occasion, as he was second in line to the throne. Diana's decision to give birth in a hospital, rather than in the royal tradition of a private home, was groundbreaking. It marked a new era for the royal family, with Diana making a conscious effort to be more relatable to the public. The birth of their second son, Prince Harry, followed just 2 years later on September 15, 1984. Harry's arrival completed the family, and Diana and Charles were now the proud parents of 2 healthy sons. As parents, both Diana and Charles were deeply involved in their children's lives, though in different ways. Diana was known for her hands-on approach to parenting, often taking her sons on trips and involving them in everyday activities. She worked hard to give them as normal a childhood as possible, despite their royal status. Charles, on the other hand, took a more traditional approach to fatherhood. As a future king, his role in his children's lives was always going to be more formal, and his duties as Prince of Wales meant he had less time to spend with them. However, it was clear that he loved his sons and took great pride in their achievements. Why Diana left the royal family? Despite being married to Diana, the relationship between Prince Charles and Camilla Parker Bowles has been one of the most talked about aspects of modern royal history. Camilla came from a well-established British family with noble connections. She was introduced to Prince Charles in the early 1970s, and the two quickly developed a close bond. It was later revealed that Charles was under immense pressure from his family, particularly his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, to marry someone who was a better match in terms of social status and public perception, which is why he picked Diana. By 1973, Camilla married Andrew Parker Bowles, a man from a respected military family, further complicating her relationship with Charles. Despite their marriages, Charles and Camilla remained close, with their emotional connection enduring throughout the years. This enduring bond between Charles and Camilla would later become one of the key factors in the breakdown of Charles's marriage to Diana. But he felt bad after everything, and recently leaked why Princess Diana's casket wasn't open. But more on that later. Behind the fairy tale exterior, the reality of the marriage was far more complicated. Diana quickly found herself overwhelmed by the pressures of royal life, and the public scrutiny was often intense. What Diana did not know at the time, however, was that her husband's heart was not entirely hers. As Charles and Diana's marriage began, so too did the strain that would define much of their relationship. While Diana was deeply committed to her role as a wife and mother, Charles, despite his public vows, continued his relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles. Though Diana wasn't initially aware of the full extent of their connection, it was clear to those around them that Charles and Camilla's bond remained strong. Diana would later speak openly about how Charles's emotional attachment to Camilla caused significant tension in her marriage. Diana was deeply hurt by the knowledge of Camilla's presence in their marriage. She described how, even before their wedding, she suspected something wasn't quite right. One of the most poignant moments Diana recalled was the first time she saw Camilla at a public event in 1981, just weeks after her wedding. Diana felt as though she was competing with a ghost, as Charles seemed completely at ease with Camilla's presence. This left Diana feeling isolated, misunderstood, and deeply betrayed. The tension between Diana and Charles escalated throughout the early years of their marriage. As the media continued to hound them, Diana found solace in the birth of her sons. However, despite her public image as a devoted mother and princess, privately, she struggled with feelings of loneliness and betrayal. Diana's struggles were compounded by the pressures of living in the royal family, where there was little room for personal expression or rebellion. As the years went on, Diana increasingly felt isolated, and her frustrations boiled over. She found herself leaning on others for support, including close friends and even members of her staff. The final straw came in 1992, when Diana's suspicions about her husband's infidelity were confirmed. She learned that Charles had resumed his affair with Camilla during their marriage, and the betrayal was too much for her to bear. Diana's emotional health began to deteriorate, and her personal struggles became more apparent to the public. In 1992, during a visit to India, Diana spoke publicly about her struggles. Her honesty and openness about her emotional state resonated with the public, making her even more beloved. However, it also marked the beginning of her journey toward independence. She had, in essence, begun to carve out a separate path for herself, one that didn't depend on her role as the wife of Prince Charles. In 1992, the separation between Charles and Diana was officially announced. While the couple continued to fulfill their royal duties separately, the damage to their relationship was irrevocable. For Diana, the decision to separate from Charles was not just a personal one, but a realization that she could no longer live in a situation where she was emotionally abandoned and publicly humiliated. Diana's departure from Charles was a difficult but ultimately liberating decision. She sought to redefine herself outside the royal family, focusing on charitable work and raising her children. The biggest royal tragedy ever, Princess Diana's death on August 31, 1997, remains one of the most shocking and tragic events in recent history, and Charles couldn't help but feel partially at fault for it, which is why he shared the truth about her funeral recently. Her death was a moment that shook the world, and the sadness surrounding her death continues to echo to this day. Diana, once the beloved people's princess, died in a car crash in Paris, and her untimely passing raised questions and sparked emotions in millions of people across the globe. Diana was a royal figure unlike any other. With her grace, beauty, and approachability, she quickly became a worldwide sensation. But her life, despite all the glamour and public adoration, was far from a fairy tale. The weight of public expectations, along with the pressures of her marriage to Charles, took a toll on her mental health and personal life. In the years leading up to her death, Diana's life was already marked by public challenges. Her marriage to Charles had been in turmoil for much of their union. Do you think Mrs. Parker Bowles was a factor in the breakdown of your marriage?
Do you think Mrs. Parker Bowles was a factor in the breakdown of your marriage?
Well, there were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded.
Compounded by infidelity on both sides, the media, which had once loved her, began to take a more critical view of her, particularly after her divorce from Charles became official in 1996. Yet even as the media's focus shifted, Diana still captured the public's heart. She remained involved in charitable work and humanitarian causes. While the media had been invasive throughout Diana's life, it was the paparazzi who would become a major factor in the tragedy that unfolded on that fateful night in Paris. The paparazzi had long been obsessed with Diana, following her wherever she went, snapping pictures of her every move, and feeding into the public's insatiable appetite for the latest news about the princess. On the night of August 31, 1997, Diana was in Paris with her companion, Dodi Fade. The couple had spent the evening at the Ritz Hotel, and they were planning to leave for a private getaway. What should have been a simple private evening quickly turned into a scene of chaos as paparazzi photographers began to chase Diana's car, desperate for another shot of the princess. The paparazzi's tactics were aggressive and relentless. They followed Diana's car as it left the hotel, and as they sped through the streets of Paris, the photographers on motorcycles kept their distance, but stayed right behind the car, snapping photos the entire time. The high-speed chase through the streets of Paris was a reckless pursuit, and it didn't take long before tragedy struck. Diana's driver, Henri Paul, who was also the head of security at the Ritz, was behind the wheel that night. He was driving at high speeds to try and evade the paparazzi. As the car entered the Pont de l'Alma tunnel, a tragic collision occurred. The driver had lost control and crashed into one of the concrete pillars. The force of the crash was severe, and Diana, along with Dodi, was severely injured. Henri didn't survive the crash, while Diana and Dodi were both rushed to the hospital in critical condition. At the time of the crash, the world had no idea just how severe the situation was. Within moments, the news spread like wildfire, and media outlets all over the world began to report the incident.
Confirmation from our very own Foreign Secretary Robin Cook, who's in the Far East at the moment, that Diana, Princess of Wales, has in fact been killed in that car accident in Paris just a few hours.
Diana, the princess who had spent years in the public eye, was fighting for her life. Despite the efforts of the doctors and medical staff at the hospital, Diana was pronounced deceased a few hours later, at the age of 36. The news of her death sent shockwaves through the world. People across the globe mourned the loss of a woman who had captured their hearts with her kindness, beauty, and compassion. The world was crying. The funeral of Princess Diana, held on September 6, 1997, was one of the most watched events in history. It was not only a royal event, but a global moment of mourning, as people from all walks of life gathered to say their final goodbyes to the beloved Princess of Wales. Diana's death had been a shock to the world, and her funeral became a symbol of both personal and collective grief. When news of Princess Diana's death broke on the morning of August 31, 1997, it was as if the world had come to a standstill. For millions of people, Diana had been an icon of compassion and kindness. She had captured the hearts of people across the globe due to her unique ability to connect with regular people. Her tragic crash in Paris shocked the world. The way in which she left and the circumstances leading up to the crash only added to the sense of injustice and loss. The days following Diana's death were filled with a mix of sadness, disbelief, and outrage, and her funeral became the moment when the world came together to mourn the loss of a woman who had touched so many lives. As the funeral preparations began, it was clear that this was not just the funeral of a royal figure, but a global event that would draw people from all corners of the world. In London, thousands of mourners began to line the streets outside of Kensington Palace, where Diana had lived for many years. Flowers, cards, and personal messages piled up in front of the gates. People who had never met Diana, but who had been touched by her work, her style, and her ability to show empathy for others, felt the need to express their sorrow. Diana's funeral service took place at Westminster Abbey. The service was carefully planned, and the royal family, led by Queen Elizabeth, was present.
We're going to switch gears now and turn to a new documentary about Princess Diana, where we hear from her older sister and the questions she still has about the night Diana died 20 years ago.
Along with other members, including Prince Charles, Diana, and their two sons, William and Harry, Diana was laid in a coffin draped in the royal standard, but it was closed, and recently King Charles revealed why. As news of the tragedy, the impact on not only the British public, but also celebrities and figures from around the world was profound. Among the many reactions to her passing, perhaps none were as emotionally charged and as symbolic as Elton John's tribute. Elton John, who had known Diana for years, had a special bond with the princess, one that was built on mutual respect and friendship. As the world mourned her sudden death, he became one of the most vocal and visible public figures to express his sorrow. His response was not just one of grief, but of a personal tribute to a woman who had meant so much to him. Before her death, Diana and Elton John had shared a genuine friendship. The singer had known Diana for years, and their bond had grown stronger over time. Their friendship was not only based on their shared experiences in the public eye, but also on their mutual understanding of the pressures and expectations that came with fame. Diana, who had been thrust into the spotlight from an early age, and Elton, who had long been a star, found common ground in their ability to navigate the world of celebrity while maintaining a sense of humanity. In fact, Diana had been a guest at Elton John's 1997 fundraising ball for AIDS research just months before the tragedy. Their connection had been more than superficial. Diana had been passionate about charity work, especially in the fields that Elton John was also deeply committed to. The moment that encapsulated Elton John's deep sorrow for the death of his friend came during Diana's funeral. He was asked to perform at the funeral service as one of the most famous and respected musicians in the world, and her close friend. He was the perfect person to offer a musical tribute. But rather than just perform one of his many popular hits, Elton chose to rewrite the lyrics to his 1973 song, Candle in the Wind. Originally written as a tribute to Marilyn Monroe, Candle in the Wind is a haunting ballad about the fragility of life and the fleeting nature of fame. Elton John rewrote the lyrics to reflect Diana's life and legacy. The song was no longer about a Hollywood icon who had been consumed by fame. It became a tribute to a woman who had captivated the hearts of people around the world and whose life had been tragically cut short. Even after such a long time, many can't seem to forget Diana, including King Charles. King Charles leaks. For years, the narrative surrounding Diana's funeral had centered on the idea that the casket remained closed to protect her family's privacy. This was a reasonable assumption, as royal funerals are often shrouded in secrecy and tradition. with the royal family maintaining a strong line of defense around personal matters. However, King Charles' revelation has turned this long-standing theory on its head. Truth comes to light as at 75, King Charles just leaked why Princess Diana's casket wasn't open. The decision to have Diana's casket closed during the funeral was, at first glance, understandable. The public and the media had watched her life unfold. The image of her body, even in the most dignified and respectful way, would have been an additional blow to her children and to those who cared about her. Many assumed that the royal family had made the decision to protect Diana's children from further trauma, but what few knew was that the decision was not driven solely by a desire to protect privacy. King Charles revealed the real reason behind the closed casket. It was because Diana's body had suffered such severe trauma in the crash that her injuries were visible. The family feared that the public would be exposed to images of the princess's injuries, something they felt would be far too much for anyone to bear. At the heart of this decision was the protection of Diana's sons. William and Harry, both teenagers at the time, had already been thrust into the global spotlight, and their mother's death was a devastating blow. The royal family understood this, and the decision to keep the casket closed was made with their emotional well-being in mind, as well as the public perception of Diana's legacy. Are there other reasons for the casket being closed? Let us know in the comments.